Back in around 1518, 1521, Spain made voyages from Cuba to South America, and they discovered Mexico. They met the emperor. They were pushed out of Mexico, and then they came back and they took it over. In between that, however, was something funny about human nature and greed, is that money gets in the way of blood. Because there was two people involved in these expeditions from Cuba to Spain. The Cuban governor and his mercenaries, and Hernando Cortez, which was the original expeditioner. So the governor sent out Panfilo de Narvaez to capture Cortez and his guys. As it happens, they were in Mexico. Shit was getting bad there, but they were cool with the emperor. So when Cortez got the message that somebody was coming to fuck with him, he sent 250 of his people, a good amount of his people, with some Indian envoys. And they went out to the settlement that they made on the coast, Veracruz, I think. And Narvaez, the commander, set up his own camp, built his own stuff, and they couldn't reach a conclusion about things because it was either kill Cortez or take him prisoner. And his people weren't about to deal with that. So they said, fuck it, we're going to set up for war. And of course, the whole thing became about Mexico's gold. And they spent a good month, or a few months, I don't remember, fighting each other for blood sport. So it wasn't just Spaniard versus Spaniard, and really it was mercenary versus mercenary. People don't really take into consideration that Germans, French, Italians were involved in these expeditions. And that's because they had to falsify their records and state that they were Spanish so they could get gold and stuff. So the reason I'm saying that is because that climaxed and the war began between those two under the sun in Gemini around 1521, I think. So that says a lot right there. If you're familiar with Gemini, Gemini is the sign of the twins. So you can think of anything that comes in twos. And it's better not to think of identical twins per se, but just to think of even two things that come together. Two pairs of mailboxes, two shrubs, and iconic duos, The Rock and Kevin Hart, all those old guys, and there's always this twin ship that comes about through Gemini, and I think of twin turbines. But that's just one simple example of how Gemini comes about. But another one is overlooked, is the seasonal I guess perception. So people don't consider that the seasons are a lifestyle. I told my friend yesterday that, like Carl Jung, the psychologist, said, there's nothing to astrology other than the same shit as wine pressing. You know, if you make a wine bottle, if you bottle a wine in spring, it's going to taste like spring, even if you drink in it, even if you're drinking it in autumn. You know, so in other words, things have the flavor of their time. You know, you wouldn't be able to bring ancient Rome to the modern period. That's why it only exists in museums. It has its own time. And timings are important in astrology. So that does that. And you have to think about the seasons as the life cycle of the sun, which the earth reflects. So when we were in winter several months ago, we were going through a certain theme, which people call the Negrito, the dark night of the soul. And this is a simulation because it's an effect, not a cause. The earth simulates this dark night experience. You know, year after year, since time immemorial, we've undergone that archetype, which in essence is deepening of the personality, coming to maturity, which is coming to thinking and thoughtfulness, which is the earth element. You know, the earth element is the creator. Maybe in human form. But so anyway, you go through a lot of tension, of course, in winter. And the final sign is the sign of the breakthrough. The light at the end of the tunnel. It's literally verbatim how a director would write it. You know, the last sign of winter, Pisces, is the light at the end of the tunnel. The sign of connection. You know, right before the rebirth happens. And then what? The first sign of spring. Aries. So then you go through Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. And this is all about the image of reforging. A simple way of pointing this out would be to say that the heart of every season is the second sign. The second sign of every season is a fixed sign. So 2, 5, 8, and 11. Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. They're the hearts of the seasons. So if you look at their esoteric rulers, and their exoteric rulers, you'll see an important image to the heart of the season. So the esoteric ruler of Taurus is Vulcan, and Vulcan's the blacksmith. So if you want, you know, verifiable proof, look at esoteric astrology, Alice Bailey. Look at the rulerships, and just tie it back to mythology and tie it to your own perceptual experiences, and you'll see that starting with Aries is this idea of the reforging of the human spirit. And Aries is the competition. The esoteric ruler is Mercury, and the sun is its exaltation. And it's all about empowerment, if not dominance, and self-overcoming. But you're being fired up by this fire sign. So that's one thing. And you have to keep in mind that the idea of life is to always be unsatisfied, to always be on the wheel. So this means that no sign is a total like 100% benefactor. The benefic signs like Jupiter, like Pisces and Sagittarius might be as close as you get to an easy ride, but you're surrounded by strife and struggle. So you're always existing under tension. So of course, what greater tension than the fire signs? If you think about yourself as a reflection of Earth, then your fire is at the core of your being, and it's constantly threatening the surface, your surface. So this is the fire that you have to keep belted, down under. This is why Mars shares a correspondence to the anus and the reproductive organs, as well as the head and the blood, because these are all places of tension. So, you're supposed to be under more tension than ever under Aries, because you're just getting out of winter. You're just getting out of the winter chill. Things are heating up, melting down, becoming more fluid, and in a state of flux. This is where the esoteric ruler, Mercury, comes in. Because this state of flux, of course, is going to cause upset, maddening, typical signs and features of Mars. But also empowerment. So you're stepping into this heating up stage. Then what happens next is interesting. You're in the Taurus stage from April 20th to May 20th. Roughly. So, you have to imagine, because these things are energetic, as I said, they're simulative. They're simulations. They're not real per se. They have a soul effect, but they're instantaneous and they're pre-planned. They're pre-formatted, and you're conditioned to them. So the changeovers are instantaneous. You feel it on a level when the moon switches sign or when the sun switches sign. People who are less sensitive, they'll notice when the leaves turn color. But anyway, that's the cool thing if you're super sensitive, or tuned in really, is that you realize that these things are instantaneous and that they're pre-formatted. So when you enter into Taurus, you have to think the first week of Taurus, all of a sudden that fire that you were connected to, that Aries fire that was giving you all that heat and energy and power, is like a light switch. And they just turned it off, and now you're back in the earth element. Now you're back in a reflection of winter. But you don't switch with it. You have that heat inside of you still. Now what happens is you are that lava in the core of the earth. And you still have that heat, and you're still burning, because there's been stuff that was pissing you off in Aries season, stuff that you didn't come to terms with, or whatever. Or if you have, then it turns into positive energy. And but you have to sit with it for this entire month of Taurus, which means that sometimes it gets super suffocating, super tense. And this year, that's what we had a good reflection of that, sadly, with the passing of David Wilcock. That happened right on the turnover date, April 20th. I don't remember if he died on that day. And that's a great example. The heat of Aries carried over, and that changeover into Taurus, where he had to sit with it, just sent him over. But for the rest of us and, general mankind, you kind of let it temper you. And this is where I come to the foraging image of spring. This is the image of spring, is that you're, externally, you would say everything's mixing and coming together and socializing and free form. But on the inside, it's really about this forging process. It's about being heated up and having to be tempered by Vulcan, the blacksmith. So you have to imagine that Taurus season is about getting banged up by that hammer and that anvil. Not for cruelty, but for the sake of, making you into a piece of art. Making you into a blade. You can't be dull here. You can't be, whatever. You can't be half-assed. And part of that is it means taking shit, not having the means to do anything about what you're pissed off about and letting it sit and transform. So Taurus experientially is a lot about personality development, as with any earth sign, because you're coming in to create